Hey, Alex, great to have you with us.
John.
Thanks for joining us on this Trestle podcast. We're going to be talking about all things apprenticeships, something that you've been involved with. And well, I'll let you introduce yourself. And yeah, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and what your involvement in apprenticeships has been?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Alex Balicki, Head of Training for PJ Care, a early onset neurological care provider. We do a lot around kind of complex nursing care, especially those that are kind of under 65, based across kind of multiple regions. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. But kind of prior to working for PJ Care, I worked for a university supporting with the higher and degree apprenticeships that they set up and offered to lots of large providers, really. And then kind of 10 years before that, I worked for a local college to where I live, working on various different kind of CPD programs for large employers. And during that time, also set up my own level 3 apprenticeships in areas like youth and community development as well. So I've had multiple hats around the apprenticeship side, from setting up provision right through now to procuring suppliers and trying to pick the best suppliers for our services as well. So yeah, lots of experience. Nice. And I've enjoyed every single day of it, I should add.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, apprenticeships can be amazing. I've only been involved in apprenticeships 4 or 5 years now. And I know it's such a huge space and huge potential, life-changing opportunities. I think you're going to talk about some examples in a bit. So tell us a bit about, what kind of provision are you involved in sort of looking after at the moment? And what kind of standards are involved, what kind of learners and challenges and successes? There's about 4 questions in there. So
I'll try and tick them off one by one. So ours is very mixed in our provision. So we utilise level 2 apprentices right up to level 7 apprenticeship. So even for myself, I like to practice what I preach. I think it's really important that if you're going to promote something, you go through the mill yourself. So I'm currently on a level 7 senior leader apprenticeship and feeling all of the pain points that our apprentices are feeling at the moment. In terms of kind of the various programs that we have on offer at PJ Care, we are doing level 2 in kind of health and social care. We've got support service apprenticeships. We've got ones in finance as well. We are also supporting other areas. So level 6 Digitech is one of the apprenticeships that we've got. We have nurse associates and registered nursing degree apprenticeships on the go as well. A big bulk of our provision is aimed though and geared at the level 2 and level 3 health and social care courses, mainly because that's the bulk of our workforce, and that's where the biggest opportunity to support and develop individuals are. So yeah, that's what we offer. In terms of pain points, biggest pain point will always be the trying to fit it in around the job. And COVID, I'm going to drop the C bomb straight away. It's probably been our biggest challenge, because it's like for the health and social care sector, it's been very much all hands on deck. So when the pandemic hit, we saw that a lot of time on the units had been restricted because all of our procedures and activities just amplified massively, from more regular IP, like infection prevention control measures, to physically locking down sites. So we couldn't have our apprentices come off of the unit and sit in a classroom and study. So everything had to be done physically in the workplace, which actually at the crux of an apprenticeship worked really well, because actually they become more attuned to learning in the flow of work, and they were having to evidence more of the stuff that they were learning on the apprenticeships, in the actual environments rather than being removed from it. So it was quite interesting from that perspective. But I mean, off the job time is always going to be the challenge, because there's so much to learn, and especially with the healthcare apprenticeships, mainly like the registered nurse degree apprenticeship and the nurse associate, the restrictions that are put onto the apprentices by the NMC, so like national, like the national governing awarding body for those courses is like the off the job time is, as many people know, like 50 to 60%. So trying to find that is quite difficult.
Wow.
So yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest pain point, but also making sure that we have the right learners on the right program has been really important as well. So the last thing we want to do is set people up to fail. So trying to progress people to the higher level apprenticeships when they're not ready for it has been quite the challenge. But a lot of that has been about working with the right providers, but also having the right internal information and advice and guidance from an employer's side. I think previously when I worked for kind of education providers and working from the trainer side, there were individuals that weren't so like understanding of all of the different regulations and rules that kind of get put on an apprentice. So they were just trying to push people through and ramp up the numbers. But actually, if it's not the right learner at the right time in the right moment, you almost set up those learners to fail every time. So trying to get that right in this organisation has also been a bit of a pain, but a good pain, because I think you have to work through those problems and find out what works best to then set up the best provision you can.
Yeah.
Did that answer all four of your questions?
Yeah, there's definitely definitely close. I can't remember what my questions were, which is fairly kind of standard for me. But yeah, some interesting points there, particularly picking up on the point about setting the learner up to fail, which can be, if something isn't right in the mix, that can be the unfortunate reality, which is a real shame. And that kind of feeds into the kind of current discourse around, low completion rates, especially on some programs. It varies a lot across different programs, right? So I know programs that I'm involved with are typically sort of 80, 90%, but some will be, below 50%. And it's kind of a wide issue, right? And also the thought came to me that apprenticeships are a team sport, aren't they? They require the commitment from not just the apprentice, not just from the training provider, but from the employer as well, and all the way through the employer, not just from upper management, but from those workplace mentors. And it requires that kind of commitment all the way through. And if one of those aspects is missing, it really undermines it, right? Picking up on the COVID catalyst, as it were. Well, do you feel that COVID was a catalyst for any positive change for those programs that your staff were on? Because I know, particularly from my side, being typically in the digitech side of things at degree level, a lot of our software engineers, IT consultants now, sort of post-COVID or almost post-COVID, if there ever will be a post-COVID, jobs are typically remote first now. Lots of them they're 100% remote. They've maybe moved away geographically from where the offices are. And with digital, that kind of works because of the nature of the space. But healthcare, completely different, right? So tell me about that. I mean, maybe the challenges or maybe the benefits that came out of COVID. Yeah,
okay. So I think a big part is horses for courses here. It depends on the apprenticeship program and the role that the individual's doing. So I think what I noticed from my own apprenticeship, actually a lot of it is knowledge-based and critical thinking, and actually it's about the connection with people. So a lot of the work that I was doing on my apprenticeship was ended up being remote learning. And for me, actually, like, it's not just about kind of the course and the role that somebody's doing, but also the learning style of the individual. So I went from my first degree, which was in youth and community development, getting okay grades. I mean, I was scraping 2.2 at times, so it wasn't the best scores that I could get. And I think that's because at the time when I took on that degree, and it was a non-apprenticeship, I should say, I took on that degree and I wasn't ready for it as an individual. I was a 19-year-old guy that was, I think I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but the passion wasn't overly there, and the way I was taught in the classroom with like 49 other learners was like really difficult for me, and I didn't really understand how to write assignments and that.
Yeah.
But this apprenticeship, this higher apprenticeship during COVID, with the remote learning and the access to technology and kind of knowing how a business works in a much better way. I mean, I'm scoring like 80, 90% on some of my assignments at the moment, which is like, it's mad. Yeah, I will show off. Yes. No, but it's mad. It just shows you the distinct like difference between if you get the learning style right and the right course for the learner compared to wrong time, wrong technology, wrong learning style, all of that stuff. The differences are really really far apart. So, and I think like single-handedly, that's where the apprenticeship programs offer far more than the traditional routes of learning. Because a person can connect to their passion and they can showcase that portfolio and they can make it really work as long as the ecosystem and infrastructure around them is right and positive, which at the moment it feels like for the course that I'm on, like it works. And I think that's what you get with the healthcare apprenticeships as well. To do a healthcare apprenticeship fully remote just doesn't work. Yeah. What you need, because it's vocational, and I would say probably the same for things like engineering and those other apprenticeships where you do have to be hands-on. And the difficulty, I think, more than anything with, say, the healthcare apprenticeships is they're all about people. And COVID at that time was like, you can't be near people, so it shouldn't work. Yeah. But what COVID also did was, like within the industry, ramp up all of the things that are really, really important, like your infection prevention control measures, your safeguarding measures, your kind of activities that you're doing with residents, your clinical skills, and all of the things that like healthcare practitioners should be zoning in on and really committing to. It really focused in on what's essential. Like, we'll get you to showcase and portfolio those bits and go above and beyond, but we'll do it from a way that like you're really like drawing out the learning from the practice. So I think COVID for the healthcare side enabled us to lean more into this world of what apprenticeship should be. They should be on the job. They should be applying learning. They should be about changing behaviours whilst you're working and developing. So from that side where practitioners couldn't do like in the classroom stuff, it became much more coaching and support on the floor and learning in the environment, which is what it should be. For the other apprentices that I've got, like the finance and the like the digitech ones, it did become more remote because like ultimately they could use their computers and they could sit in those quiet spaces and really zone in. And I think what we saw is that people became more focused, so they weren't messing around with like the additional nice to have support stuff. When they went into their sessions on Teams, it was like for a solid hour they were focusing there and then, and they could use the side screen to do more research about the topic while the lecturers were talking. Yeah, whereas if you're in the classroom and someone pulls out their mobile as a side screen and is Googling, they're normally told, why have you got the phone out? You're not paying attention. But actually, I think if anything, it's reinforcing the learning, and that sometimes gets overlooked.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So yeah, pros and cons.
Yeah, fantastic. I am a great advocate of the kind of learning design that should work both offline and online, which is a difficult thing to do. Yeah. But I think a lot of provision, particularly in higher education, if it was an HE kind of apprenticeship, was reliant traditionally on that sage on the stage kind of approach and having these long sessions that are quite sort of fluid, and there's lots of talking through slides and stuff, which just does not, it's not, in my opinion, it's not great learning in itself. And face-to-face time can be spent a lot better. And then time online together has to be spent differently. Because if it is just one-way knowledge transfer in the form of lectures, that's kind of impoverished learning is my view. And really, when we're online during COVID, actually creating those collaborative kind of discussion spaces was even more important. And you can design them, you design activities. But I know from a learning design point of view, those educators, I think, need to get away from the addiction to content and slides. I think it's more about, and what are apprenticeships about? Like you said, it's vocational, right? Regardless of whether it's digital or in healthcare, it's all vocational and applied. And the learning should be like that as well. But yeah, and I think in some senses, COVID has helped be a catalyst to accelerate that. So long may it continue.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree there. But I think as well, it stripped away a lot of the nonsense that, like all training providers, like I know there's within the programs, there's obviously the core learning outcomes that everybody needs to provide to meet the standards of the apprenticeship. But then there's a lot of stuff that gets thrown in as added value. But sometimes that just detracts away from what the learners should actually be learning. So I think COVID really just reset the pack for everybody and just said, like, let's zone in on what learners need, and they absolutely need for EPA. And I think ultimately you get a better quality apprenticeship as a result of that.
Yeah, it's been a refining experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that was really interesting was in the early days, just seeing how like the training providers reacted to like having to switch their provision to be more remote. Like obviously innovation comes out of necessity, and I think like we saw that with first Microsoft Teams and Zoom in terms of how quickly they developed their products and got people using the stuff. But what was really interesting from the early days as well was to see how the academic professionals who weren't used to the setup of Zoom and Teams, some of them really struggled in the early days. And I would have thought actually, like, especially at higher in degree level, like these are the individuals that should have been doing this for decades. I mean, think how long the Open University has been around, and yet like I think one of the best things for the education sector that's happened is you see all these other universities that are they promote the vocational stuff and they promote the in-classroom stuff. How quickly their lecturers had to switch to becoming up to date with like the OU's model of delivery. I'm not saying the OU models of delivery is best either here, just for the record. But
they put a lot of work into
one of the early
getting it working well online, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. But the one thing I have noticed with kind of the whole setup as well, though, is like even though everybody's got like Microsoft Teams and Zoom or like their own like online provision, the support apprenticeship program, the support apprenticeship systems that kind of float around, like supporting the apprenticeships, they still seem really early in their development stages. So like having used, I think we've got about 14 different standards with I think there's about 6 or 7 suppliers that we use, and every single one is using a different platform in a very, very different way.
That sounds fun to do.
One of them I've seen just, honestly, it's an absolute headache. And from an employer side, trying to pull reports and understand where your learners are at to be able to provide the support can become quite time consuming and difficult. So, and especially kind of coming back to the COVID question, during a time when everything went remote, not to have systems that supported that remote understanding, and that includes like some of the well-known universities as well, that becomes really difficult because it doesn't help me as an employer like know whether somebody's on track and know whether we need to intervene and stuff. So I've had to rely quite heavily on the tripartite reviews and getting like line managers to feed back to me internally. But I just thought it was really interesting from a time when lots of collaboration and technology was being thrown out. One of the things that lagged behind was the apprenticeship systems, which are the things that actually support the apprentices.
Yeah, well, I that's obviously close to my heart as well, and part of the aim of Trestle was to try and solve some of those issues. But I think a lot of the problem, I think in a way, I mean, with apprenticeships in the modern sense are fairly new, and there's lots of large systems that have been built to help with compliance, and I think that is part of the problem, right? That they've been built out of necessity with compliance as the main motivator, not necessarily the end learner in mind. But the maximum benefit will come when these systems are actually, they augment the learner experience, and they're not just a place for forms to go, which I think is a common the kind of the state of the marketplace at the moment, as it were. So I think these kind of learner-centric tools is where we should be headed. But then, of course, the learners aren't paying the bills, and that's the kind of business reality. So I know, well, that's something I'm particularly passionate about at Trestle, trying to do things a little bit differently.
Absolutely, and I do think a big part of it, kind of, as you say, like, it's not about having a database or a data storage place. Like, that stuff needs to be functional, not just for the learner, but for the employer too. Like, I've got an invested interest in knowing what knowledge, skills, and behaviours are being developed throughout the program, and I want to see our apprentices move from being like not competent in one area to being highly competent in an area, and I want to see that journey to know that the training supplier that we're utilising, I want to know that the money's being well spent. Even though we use like the apprenticeship levy for a lot of our staff, like, it's still a big investment. Like, we not just money as well, it's time. And from a personal side, I'm passionate about knowing that somebody's moving towards their dream, their dream job. Like, we don't want people that are stagnant and feeling unfulfilled. Like, if they're with us, but their kind of aspiration is to, I mean, I've got people in the organisation that want to be like zookeepers and run their own coffee shops and stuff. So why can't we use apprenticeships to help get them onto that journey? Like, as long as it relates to their role somewhat, but helps move them on from a development side. Like, we can use apprenticeships to move people into dream careers with ease. But the employer's got to be willing to like support and invest in that way. And we absolutely are. Like, we'd much rather develop people than just keep them stagnant.
Yeah, that's what apprenticeships are meant to be about, aren't they? Growth of the person, not just knowledge transfer. It's not just about reading books or watching videos, but growth of the person. That's why I think it's.
But that's what you said as well in terms of like.
No, I was just going to say that reflection is such a key point in apprenticeships, isn't it? We're encouraged to reflect, and learning doesn't really happen without reflection. And I think that's something that, because it's so explicitly part of, or meant to be part of apprenticeships, you can really lean into that and kind of leverage it on a program.
Yeah, especially at those higher levels, it becomes essential. At the lower levels, it's still very, very important. But I think at the lower levels, I'd probably argue that a drive and a motivation and a passion for the thing that they're studying is probably highest priority out of everything. Because ultimately, if someone doesn't care about what they're doing, they're never going to succeed. And I know we've been guilty of somebody just saying, "Oh yeah, I think this would be good for me," and not necessarily drilling down into the motivation. And then lo and behold, like, who are the first ones to drop off of the program? It's those ones that just actually, it's not about, like, the apprenticeship that we've put them on isn't actually getting them closer to what their dream career is. So it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's so important. And that's part of the initial conversations before an apprenticeship begins, right? And that commitment and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So...
And understanding their motivation is really important. And I know this one will sit close to your heart, but also understanding what that learner's experience is really important as well. Like, in the early days of apprenticeships, I can say this because it's absolutely true. Understanding somebody's knowledge, skills, and behaviours before they walked into a program wasn't done anywhere near as effectively as it should be done. So you had learners relearning tons of work, or and like I've got an example of one learner that they signed up for a registered nursing degree, and they didn't. That wasn't the first thing they did. They signed up for an assistant practitioner program, but it turned out that they'd done 2 out of the 3 years of a nursing degree. So should have APEL'd way past that point. But because the knowledge, skills and behaviours weren't tracked beforehand, all this person needed to do was like the 2-year top-up apprenticeship, and they would have been qualified. But instead, they ended up doing this 2-year assistant practitioner course first, losing 2 years of their life and just going over all of the work that they'd been through originally. It's just madness. And they're part of the frustrations of people not doing apprenticeships correctly, and suppliers and training providers not really getting to grips with the training needs analysis and understanding where people have come from. Which is why the latest movement in terms of getting that part of the program or that part of the enrolment stage watertight, I'm all for it, because we need to not fail people that have got the experience and the understanding and can evidence that as well. Just because we don't want to fail those people just because highly qualified practitioners aren't doing their information, advice and guidance properly.
Indeed. Yeah, very important. So
yeah, you can put that on a t-shirt if you want.
And printed on a mug as well. So final point I wanted to talk to you about was really you've mentioned, I think, some sort of successes already, but any apprenticeship success stories that have really sort of stuck with you?
So we've got quite a few. I'm not one of them yet. I'll put myself in there in a few years to come, I'm sure. But we do have one that stands out to me kind of more so than anybody. So we have this individual that's been with us just short of 2 years now, and she's 51 years old. When she started her working career, kind of at the age of wasn't working career at this stage, but probably should have been classified it given all of the stuff she was doing. About 13, 14, her mother became seriously ill with a neurological condition, and she ended up being a young carer for her mother and just took on loads of responsibility. Her mother worked in a care home and was I think she was a registered manager at the time. So nursing and healthcare was kind of what she was accustomed to right from a young age, and absolutely idolised her mother. So dream career for her was a nurse. She wanted to be a nurse and she wanted to move into nursing. So even at that really young age, she knew where she wanted to be. Finished school with barely any O-levels at the time, and low-level O-levels as well, I should say. So because of having to care for a mother and kind of run the house, essentially, she just wasn't given the opportunity within the schooling education system to really have the opportunity to excel. Not because of her ability, because we've proven at a later stage she's absolutely got the ability and the potential, but just because the system around her, the infrastructure around her, didn't allow her at that moment in time to achieve everything that she wanted to be and could be. So she ended up kind of being a young carer, unfortunately to the point her mother passed away. From that point, picked up a couple of low-level entry-level jobs, I should say, not low-level, entry-level jobs, and then had to kind of back away from them because she then ended up having children. She had a number of children, and she decided that she would homeschool them all. So she's gone through a 14-year process of homeschooling. And when I was speaking to her about it, she was kind of going, I just followed like what I was meant to follow, and I just like took on the national curriculum and kind of like paired up with people, and now her kids have gone through and sat GCSEs and like they're in a really, really strong position because they've been supported throughout that whole process by this wonderful individual. But like I was kind of saying to her, like for somebody that doesn't have like any real O-levels here, you've done phenomenally well. Like you've taken I think it's 4 kids in the end through a whole education curriculum system, all different ages. So she was having to teach multiple education systems at the same time. I was saying to her, like, the transferable skills from that experience are just phenomenal. So if we're talking about does she have the potential and the capacity, absolutely. So what failed her in the early days? And it just shows you, like, if somebody's got kind of the passion and the determination, like, then they can do stuff and to a high level. So she got to this point where actually, like, she could move past that and start pursuing her career, and then COVID hit, that dreaded C word again. But she looked at the economy and what she was doing, and she went, "No, I can help here. I can work for a care home, and I can give it a go." So she went and worked for a care home, but it didn't quite work out with that one. She was frustrated at, like, the lack of standards. It would be kind of the best way of putting it. So she then joined us and has been with us for quite some time. And recently we promoted her to a team leader within our side. And that was because of her work ethic, the commitment to quality and all that stuff. But also because we put on a level 3 apprenticeship, which she's, like, absolutely smashed through. She's got her functional skills English now at level 2. She's about to sit the functional skills maths exam as well. So once she gets through that, she's already been interviewed by a university and given a conditional offer to move into the nurse associate program. So 30 years on, she's now able to follow that dream career that she set out at the age of, like, 14, 15. So apprenticeships are phenomenal. And it's not just because, like, what we need to look at is how we can use them for people that have genuinely missed out on the opportunity in the early days. Like, they're such a powerful resource and powerful opportunity for people that we should be capitalising on that. Because if you get the right person with the right drive at the right time in their life, with the right support and the right mentorship, with all the right systems and training around them, you'll have somebody that's phenomenal. And they're the people that will run the businesses in the future, right?
Amazing.
So I thought that was meant to be a 30-second spiel, but you've got a full life story.
Like, with stories like that, I think you have to. I really appreciate you sharing that, because those are the kind of stories that make it real. And
Absolutely.
I think remind us all, regardless of what area of apprenticeships that we're in, the positive impact that they can have, and they can be truly transformative when you get that magic mix, as you've highlighted.
Absolutely. And I think we sometimes forget that there are people that are disadvantaged through, like, education systems and through social systems, that actually it's not because they're not clever or bright, it's because they don't have the opportunity to excel. And actually, ultimately, for education, we want to move them into employment. So if we can set up that environment from an employer's side so that they can excel and it's right for that individual, then actually the education that comes along with that whole process, like, can transform and turn this person into a talented person that's on pursuit to their future career and their future dream job. Exactly.
Well, that's a wonderfully positive note to finish on. So we'll leave it there. We appreciate you coming on the podcast, Alex, and sharing your experiences personally, being an apprentice, but also working with all those other apprentices and the positive impact it can have. So thank you again, and hopefully speak again.
Awesome.